o'clock. Let's get started. Brad Gilly, on to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Francis. Thank you very much, John. We appreciate that. By the way, Judy with EPARTRADE actually put something up in the chat, says, good to see you, Kirk, Jason, Brad, Travis. So good to see you too, Judy. But we're talking with Tilton Engineering here today. And as before we get started, I just want to read from the Tilton Catalog just to give folks an idea of exactly what you do. And then I'll introduce each one of our panelists and we'll talk about everything that we have. But Tilton produces a wide range of driveline and brake components, in-cockpit controls and starter motors. Driveline components include clutches, flywheels, bell housings, and hydraulic release bearings. Brake components and in-cockpit controls include pedal assemblies, master cylinders, balance bars, proportioning valves, and related accessories. Super starters by Tilton were introduced in 1981 as the first high-torque mini starter for racing applications. And our panelist here, Jason Wall, the CEO of Tilton Engineering. And hello, Jason, welcome. Kirk, and help me if I get your name wrong. Is it Scoffle?
Yeah, you got it. Good job.
Okay, good. Well, so far I'm at 100% with names this week, so that's a good thing. He is the Vice President of Tilton Engineering, and Travis Hogue, the Vice President and General Manager of Wayne Taylor Racing, our special guest as well. And we're going to spend the next 50 minutes here talking about everything from brakes and clutches, in-cockpit controls, and all of that Tilton Engineering produces. And if you have a question, just type it into the chat, and at any point during this whole presentation, and we'll get those questions answered for you as best as we can. But again, we appreciate you, and I'll try and address you individually just because there's a total of 4 of us here, so that way we're not talking over each other. But by all means, if a question or a comment is addressed to one individual and anyone else wants to follow up, please feel free to jump in as well. So Jason, I'll start with you as the CEO of Tilton. Just give us a little bit of a background and what Tilton does to help racers.
Okay. Well, Tilton's been around since 1972, so our 48th year in business. We were founded by Mac Tilton, who was a racer. Mac raced Formula 3 back in the day. But then Mac was also a very talented machinist, fabricator, etc. Worked for BRE, Datsun, way back when, winning Trans Am championships prior to starting Tilton Engineering. Really, our specialty are brakes and clutches. We supply, a lot of, your professional level racing series, but have also been focused heavily on more of the grassroots level of motorsports over the last several years. Probably about 75% of the NASCAR teams rely on us for clutches, flywheels, bell housings, etc. We supply all of the clutches for the LMP2 cars and most of the clutches, in the Daytona prototypes.
Wow, that's impressive. Kirk, let me turn it over to you for a moment, Vice President of Sales and Marketing, and Tilton Engineering, a dealer network that literally is on every populated continent, servicing racers throughout the entire world. Tell us a little bit about your job and again, as far as what Tilton can do for racers globally.
We have a very large network of distributors. We were fortunate enough, we've been around many years and got a good established network. Probably about 40% of our business is overseas. We do a lot of business in the UK, Germany, France, the States. Here in the States, we have a wide range of customers, like Jason was saying, from NASCAR and IMSA down to your grassroots racers and SCCA to circle track racing, like late model asphalt stuff, off-road, street performance. So we have quite a diverse product line and customer base, and trying to you have to kind of wear a lot of hats. Got to know a lot of different markets, a lot of different customers, and we just try to do a good job in providing good customer service. We don't sell direct for the most part. It's all through dealers and distributors, but we're always here to help the customers as far as if they need help with part numbers or technical support. We're always here. We try to maintain a good website and keep good information on our website so the customer could find the information they need without contacting us. But if the need arises, we're an email or phone call away, and we're glad to help.
Yeah, I have to say on the website, by the way, the media section with all the videos and everything that's up there is so incredibly comprehensive that, I mean, I think you could just sit there all day and be entertained, but also informed about the products that you guys have.
And part of that is, I think people think we're a lot larger company than we are. I mean, we do have, good market share in what we do, but, we do a lot with, relatively small personnel. So we try to have as much information on our website and as possible to help, reduce the phone calls and just have the information there for the customers to access.
Yeah, it's a great asset and resource. Travis Hogue, let's get to you. Wayne Taylor Racing, big things happening in 2021. A switch over to Acura. You've got a great driver lineup and Ricky Taylor and Felipe Albuquerque who are going to run all the races for you. You've also got Alexander Rossi who's going to run a handful of races for you, and Elio Castroneves, who I'm a big fan of as well, who's going to run the Rolex. So, talk about what's going on at Wayne Taylor Racing and also how Tilton Engineering helps you guys out.
Thanks for the intro. Yeah, it's a busy off season, if you will. It's a big change for us. Pretty excited. We, as you said, we changed from Cadillac, which was a long-term partnership, now to Acura. At the same time, we changed drivers, so it's pretty exciting to get Ricky back to us. He's one guy that's been with us for a while and left stables and now back. But I think there's a lot of exciting things coming, and I think the most exciting thing is partnering up with somebody that is looking at the long term with this new LMDH project that's going to be coming out. So a lot of exciting things going on. We've had a couple new partners come on board with us this off season, and we still continue to do some other programs in Lamborghini Super Trofeo as well. So we're trying to grow. In these times, it's actually, I think Jason and Kirk and I were talking earlier that there really hasn't been much of a downtime in racing. So it's a good off season, good problem to have. But I think, our relationship with Tilton started back in Grand Am days. And really the engineering resource was the big thing for us. When you run 24-hour races and back then when we were running, we weren't allowed to run carbon clutches. And, when you're doing 30 stops during a race and you're doing different stints on hot tires and cold tires, and the engineering side of it for us to get the competitive advantage and the reliability is how this relationship started. Everything that we've kind of gone to them for has been answered, addressed, and fixed probably better than we had anticipated. So that relationship is just continually to develop, and hopefully we carry that on into LMDH.
Which should be a wonderful thing. Well, let's talk about the company and what you guys have to offer for racers. And Jason, while you're the CEO, you have a BS in mechanical engineering from the University of Akron. You started working in the engineering department at Tilton in 1997. So obviously, when it comes to the products that you guys sell and service, you've got a great understanding of that. So let's just talk about it. The clutches commonly used in sports car racing today. We can start right there, and maybe some of the differences in the different divisions and all of that.
Sure. Well, at the high end of like what Wayne Taylor is running these days, it's all on carbon, which is a carbon composite clutch. So the clutch plates, both the floater plates and driven plates, are made from a special form of carbon fiber. That's very lightweight, very strong, very low wearing, smooth engaging. It's everything you could ever want in the clutch material. And those are relatively small in a 5.5 inch or 140 millimeter diameter multi-plate clutches. So typically either 3 or 4 plate clutches. As you would, and you would continue to see that similar size and type of clutch as you move down a little bit down the rung. But certainly when you get down into, more of like the SCCA club level racing and whatnot, you're going to see more of our 7.25 inch clutches, which is kind of our bread and butter product that we've been making for a very long time. We've got a very diverse kind of modular product line there where we can interchange different diaphragm springs, different number of plates, different I think we've got 47 different input shaft splines that we can work around. So like literally thousands and thousands of combinations that we can make. But those are the, kind of the main things that we see today.
Now, when I start to think about what Tilton produces, I always think that, yeah, in racing, obviously, we're trying to find more speed, and some people equate that with horsepower, some people equate that with handling and all of that. But with everything that Tilton has to offer, from the clutches and the brakes and the in-cockpit controls and a lot of different things like that, I almost think of it as, if there's a better way, you offer it. If there's a better way to maybe do things more efficiently, if there's a better way to maybe save some weight, if there's a better way to actually make that car go forward or make that car go stop. I mean, is that fair to say, that Jason, that's what Tilton does, is a better way?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we, that's what we strive for. You know, one of the things Mac Tilton, used to teach us was that you don't give the customer necessarily what they want, you give them what they need. And most of the time, that's information and education. And that kind of starts from there. And then, beyond that, it's a constant refinement of the product. I mean, you could take something like our 7¼ inch metallic clutch that we've been making a version of that clutch since the early 80s. Just the clutch housing has been through so many revisions over the years that we ran through the alphabet twice. So, and that's just one component of the clutch. So it's just kind of a constant evolution, constant improvement type of product. There's not a lot revolutionary happening these days. It's much more evolutionary. But if you were to take one of those clutches that we made, say, 15 years ago and bolt it onto a modern racing engine, it probably wouldn't live. It is, at times that close to the edge, but we work really, really hard to give our customers that reliability, that to finish first, you first must finish, is the old saying. So, that's kind of our driving goal, is 0 failures.
Travis, I want to ask you, he just mentioned, Jason did, it's not a revolution, but maybe more of an evolution. For you guys, you're changing manufacturers, you're involved in different divisions and all of that. So when it comes to those things and being able to work with Tilton and get what you need, and not only get what you need that you need specifically from year to year, but what's going to be better from last year to this year. Can you speak about working with Tilton on that?
I can, and I can go back to the starting days when we were doing this. Before the carbon came out, we were having issues with, getting through a Daytona race was very difficult. And working with them, we developed different phases, different thicknesses of pressure plates. We moved weight around in the clutch to make it last, and that's just kind of a piece of working with them on what it does to a race team. It takes something that you see normally on the shelf, and you refine that, and you make it work in the application that you need. And that was a prime example of, certain floater plates, they didn't need the weight. Let's put it somewhere where it needs to dissipate the heat. That's the product they gave us. And once we started moving through that process, we never had a failure again. So when I mentioned earlier, working on the engineering side, it's like you mentioned, it's about evolution, but it's also about reliability is one thing, performance is another, and you have to have a fine line between the two. And that's what Tilton seems to understand.
Yeah, everyone's always looking for for that magic and try to get as much of everything, of all of those things as they can. Kirk, when it comes to dealing with customers and the sales and marketing side of it, and dealer networks and all of that stuff, obviously Wayne Taylor Racing, they're out there, customer of yours in a way, but the racer who's out there, who's looking to evolve what they do, and either working through you guys directly at Tilton or working through the dealer network. Can you talk about just the way business happens in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I personally take a lot of phone calls and emails myself, and I give the same level of service as I would Travis to your just average guy. And a lot of times we get a lot of calls from people that bought an old used NASCAR clutch that trickled down to them, or secondhand, and we strive to give the best service we can. Even though they may not be spending money with us now, down the road they remember the service and quality we provide, and when it comes time to buy something new, they'll remember Tilton. And so it's always been a number one goal of mine, is just we provide good service, good product, and overall good value. So it's just a combination of price and performance and reliability. I think we strike a really good blend of all that with our products.
You know, Jason, when it comes to, you know, you mentioned carbon, you mentioned different types of materials and all of those things that are being used. I think a lot of times, you know, some racers have a tendency to latch onto something and say, ooh, I've got to have this, I want to carbon that, or I want that. But that may not necessarily be the right thing for what they're doing. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And maybe what works in one type of car may not work in another type of car. And just because it sounds cool doesn't mean it's right for you.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, one thing that we, you know, really try is to find that clutch that's going to be appropriate for not just the car, but for the customer. Okay. And when I say that, you know, like a small example, you know, we've got some customers down at the Snowball Derby this weekend, you know, big super late model race. And some of their competitors were running, you know, just a little a 2-plate clutch where they really should have been running a 3-plate clutch. And that's something we would have never recommended for one of those cars. That, yeah, you could kind of get away with it, but you're giving up a certain amount of reliability for a very, very, very small difference in performance. So, you know, we don't look at the clutch as being something that's going to win you races. The clutch will lose you races, but it won't, you know, it's not something where it's necessarily going to go out there and you know, give you that competitive advantage. So we focus a little bit more on the durability and reliability than maybe some of our competitors do. You know, but as a result, you know, you spend more time on the setup of the car or whatever, tuning of the engine, you know, you're going to get that performance back. You know, like you said with carbon, you know, carbon is an amazing material. You know, it has every advantage over a metallic material other than the price, because the manufacturing process for it is just so intense that it just prices itself out of the market, you know, for many customers. As a result, you know, we've put probably more development into our metallic clutches, you know, over the last 10, 15 years than we have into the carbon clutches, because carbon has you know, it's amazing, it's great, but it has a very limited marketplace. Most racing series, sanctioning bodies won't allow it. So, you know, putting that development into the metallic clutches that we sell, you know, honestly, 30, 40, 50 times more of, you know, results in, you know, that performance advantage for a wider number of customers.
Well, let me ask you about that then too, because when it comes to the development of the metallic clutches, and you did speak a little bit to the evolution earlier, but the evolution of clutches used in sports car racing or in general, you know, what are some gains that you see are being made, the evolution, if you will?
You know, in terms of metallics, well, a lot of it comes back to what we learned with Travis, you know, and Wayne Taylor Racing, you know, going back, well, 5, 6, 7 years ago. That as we've learned to be more efficient about where the steel or where the material, the mass in the clutch is placed, it allows us to make a clutch that is both lighter weight and lasts longer, because we're looking at it from the durability standpoint. There's also a constant evolution of the friction materials. That if you looked at friction materials from when even, you know, Kirk and I started about the same time, going back 23 years ago, which seems like yesterday, but if you look at the friction materials we were running back then, you know, they couldn't hold a candle to the stuff that we're using today, you know, and that's something where, you know, obviously we don't make the friction materials, but, you know, working with the friction material manufacturers and getting it tested under the right conditions, you know, that is a really big challenge, especially these days, because testing is so limited in motorsports. That, you know, you've got to have an enormous amount of confidence before you can just throw something out to the customer, because, you know, a missed test day because of a clutch is completely unacceptable. You know, in some ways it's as bad as missing a race day. Because of the way it would set back, and it could set back an entire season for the team.
Yeah, that is very true. Kirk, let me ask you, on the sales and marketing side, I mean, obviously you've been with the company for a long time and have to have a pretty good working knowledge of the products that are out there as well. What are some of the trends we're seeing? What are you guys selling?
Well, about 2 years ago, we decided to diversify, the markets we serve. We've been in race, our main business for all, since 72 has been hardcore racing. And hardcore racing is only so big. And even though we have a good piece of that pie, we're always looking for, to expand, make it bigger. So we started look at the street performance market. So about 2.5 years ago, I want to say, we sat down, clean sheet of paper, taking the knowledge we've gained through our racing clutches and applied it on a larger clutch size, larger scale clutch, I should say. Because you can't use a small diameter, 5.5 inch or even a 7/4 inch clutch on the street. It's just a whole different requirement. You need more heat capacity and mass to manage the stop and go driving. You need, some modulation and drivability. Where in a lot of the racing applications, you just use the clutch to get the car on the track and don't really use it besides that. So we've come out with what we refer to as our ST246 twin disc clutch. So that's our, 246 stands for 246 millimeters, where our 7 core is 185 millimeter, 5.5 is 140, and we even go down to 114, which is a 4.5 inch inch diameter clutch, like Indy Lights and IndyCar stuff. So we took a lot of the materials we used for like the pressure plate and floater plates, kind of applied it from our racing clutches into the ST246, took a lot of geometry and materials on the main clutch cover itself, applied that. And then, but where our other racing clutches is OT series, which stands for, is open type and it's a lug drive clutch. They don't have straps. In a street car, high performance street clutch, you want straps that connect the pressure plate, floater plate to the cover, because that keeps the clutch quiet. Where if in a racing clutch, you disengage it, you hear the rattling, because that's the floater plates and pressure plates rattling on the legs. So this was one of our first strap type clutch. And with that, we targeted the Chevy LS, Ford Coyote with the Tremec T56s, TKOs behind them, going into, pro touring type cars, venturing out into, Corvette C5, C6, C7, all these modern day muscle cars are making a ton of power right out of the factory, and people are modifying it. So we bought ourselves a Camaro SS, supercharged it, and started putting testing clutches that we're developing in it, and came out with what we have now, which is the ST246, which you could get with organic line discs with sprung hubs, which the sprung hubs helps keep the gearbox quiet, where some of the other other products on the market don't have sprung hubs, so you get a lot more gearbox noise. So that was one of the things we really focused on developing, to make sure we could fit those sprung hubs in there. And then we also offer a cerametallic solid hub for the more demanding guys that got to go to the drag strip a lot, or really really high power. So that's where we've been focusing a lot of our attention lately.
Yeah, so the end user on something like that is obviously going to be someone who has a car, but your customer base, and now are we talking like more speed shops and things like that, people who are souping up these high performance cars that are coming off showrooms?
Correct. That and these companies such as Bowler Transmissions, Modern Driveline, where they're big Tremec, transmission distributors, where we're a component of what they sell. So they sell these transmission kits with the bell housing, and most of them use our hydraulic release bearing with that. And they're able to offer their customer kind of a driveline solution to put those modern engines and transmissions into older cars. But then also we deal with some of the speed shops directly, but most of our sales are through distribution, where we don't necessarily get to talk to the customer directly, but we're always there to do so.
All right. Travis, I want to ask you, I mean, I think a lot of us understand exactly what it is that a clutch does, obviously making the car go from a stop, but they all work differently in different applications. So clutch use training, how much of that, if any, is needed when bringing in new drivers? Let's just say you're going to bring in someone from NASCAR, bring in someone from somewhere else. How much training do they need?
Not as much now as they used to. That's one thing. The technology's come a long way, where I'd say 7-8 years ago, it was a big conversation in the debrief and the training of the drivers. Of we actually had sensors on the car that told us how much pressure and making sure their foot was off the clutch, and how long they were actually using the clutch to leave the pit box. And we monitored all that, shared all that information with Tilton, obviously. And as we develop this, we probably don't even think about it anymore. It's probably the only time it ever comes up is just reminding the drivers when they leave on hot tires that they don't have to worry about the clutch anymore. Where before we were very, very picky, and we had a set procedure that we had to tell them, if you're going to last 24 hours, you have to leave at this, you have to do this. And by the time you get to the end of pit box number 2, you better be off of it. So the technology's come a long way.
Wow. Is there, either Travis or Jason, is there any of that technology that we can talk about? Like what was the evolution in that?
Well, I would say, Travis, would you say that most of that went away when we made the switch to the carbon clutch?
Which by the
I
way,
would
you're
say,
the winning one from the 24-hour race this year.
Oh, that's awesome.
There it is.
We were going to make a display for the PRI and SEMA show, but those got canceled. So here it is at my desk.
Still looks like new.
Yeah.
I would say, the carbon clutch definitely took a lot of the pressures away. But even as the older clutches developed towards the end of the life of that, before we went to the DPI and before we went to the actual conversion to carbon, it slowly began that we weren't as concerned. We had one race back in, I'll call it 2007, and we were not running a Tilton product at the time. That we push started the car for 22 hours out of 24. Shortly after that is when I started to develop a relationship with Tilton, and then we kind of worked our way around that. And before we switched over to carbon, the only thing we talked to the drivers about is really just maintaining the same launches every time so that we didn't overheat it. What we found is one driver could do damage that would affect everybody else. So, but yeah, I'd say that the carbon clutch has been no issues, but even the development of the other stuff, with some of the other cars that we've seen, I can set 2 clutches side by side, and people have tried to mimic the same thing that the Tilton clutch is. And I've seen failures that, one, we've never seen before the Tilton product, and 2, that you just wouldn't expect to see in a clutch, and, cracking in between pedals and different things. So it's a little bit more scientific that goes into it than just piecing a clutch together and putting it on the racetrack.
Jason, do you want to add to that at all?
No, that's kind of what I was guessing, was that, by the end of the metallic clutch development with Wayne Taylor, we had turned it into something that was pretty bulletproof. The switch to carbon, which, mind you, we've been making carbon clutches. We were the inventors of the carbon clutch back in 1986. So, the switch to the carbon clutch, you're talking about a material that is just, literally on another planet compared to, steel and metallic materials. Carbon was originally developed for the space shuttle, both for the heat resistant tiles and for the brakes. If you've flown on an airplane a commercial airliner in the last 20, 30 years, that plane stopped with carbon brakes. Carbon is a unique material in that it has a thermal capacitance that increases with temperature. So the hotter the carbon gets, the more its thermal capacitance increases. So, like, if you kept dumping heat into a metallic clutch, it's going to keep getting hotter and hotter at a pretty linear rate. With a carbon material, when you dump heat into it at a constant amount, it will actually plateau. So, that's the kind of number one thing. It's also material that, unlike any metallic material, its strength increases with temperature, which is, completely, unusual. Most steels and aluminum especially is going to nosedive, whereas carbon actually gets stronger the hotter it gets, to a point, of course. The material itself is pretty amazing. Now where the balancing act comes in is that you have this amazing carbon material, but then you still have the rest of the clutch that's made from metal. So the clutch cover is aluminum, the diaphragm spring is steel. That if you get the carbon stacked so hot, that heat will transfer into those metallic components, and eventually lead to their failure. But, that being said, that you look at what the carbon material can take in terms of, both use and abuse, compared to what a metallic clutch can take, and they're just in two totally different ballparks.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
We've got some questions from the chat that we'll get out there for you guys as well. Michael Ocean wants to know, what clutch kits do you recommend for street drifting, street drag applications for Evo 8.9 and the Subaru GC8 2002 to 2005, seeing 200 to 300 horsepower? I know that's fairly specific, but can you comment on that?
Well, we do have clutch kits for Mitsubishi, Evolution, Evo 8 through 10 applications. They're more oriented towards racing applications and street applications. We really currently do not have like a true good street, clutch for those cars. We do have people that run our twin plate 7 1/4 Serra metallics on the street and run our car. We do make a carbon version, for the Mitsubishi Evolutions, but these are usually guys that are, doing rally or going to the drag strip a lot. But for everyday driving, we really don't have a, appropriate clutch for that. And again, it's going to what our philosophy is like. We could sell you something that we make, but it may not be right for what you're doing. So we're rather than create ill will and sell you a clutch that you're not going to like on the street use, you rather just steer you to maybe a more appropriate offering.
Especially when you're talking like 200 to 300 horsepower, as he's saying in this application, our clutches would be incredibly overkill for something like that, and probably something you wouldn't be overly happy with, because it's not going to have, you don't need us, to be honest. You're better off with like a high performance stock type clutch. So,
that's fair. That's very fair.
We run into this a lot.
Yeah. And that ST246 that we came out for the Chevy Ford markets is just too large. It will not fit, in a lot of these imported applications. It's just too big of a clutch.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. Tulio Fazio says, what are the main characteristics that determine the amount of torque and horsepower a clutch can handle? For same size steel versus carbon clutch, which one delivers torque better and why?
Right. So, that's a good question. And horsepower and torque are two totally different things. Torque is rarely a problem in one of our clutches because, we typically deal in multi-plate clutches. So by, stacking clutch discs on top of each other, you're doubling or tripling the torque capacity of the clutch every time you do that. Like I said, torque capacity, usually isn't a concern. The horsepower is a little bit of a bigger deal, because that is a little bit more indicative of how much heat you're going to put into the clutch, when you're launching the car from a stop. Really what I would say is the even bigger thing is the application. What are you doing with the car? That's usually the first thing when somebody calls up and asks, like, hey, what clutch should I run? I've got this. I will almost, always ask, what are you doing with the car? Because, if you have 400 horsepower in an oval track application, versus 400 horsepower in a road race application versus 400 horsepower in a rally or street application, you're going to get 3 or 4 different recommendations from us. So, part 2 of his question asking about, for a same size steel versus carbon clutch, which one delivers torque better and why? To be honest, they're about the same. The coefficient of friction of the carbon material at the operating temperatures that you're going to be using at, compared to a modern metallic material, are going to be very, very similar. So in terms of like one gripping better than the other, you're really not going to see much, appreciable difference these days.
And I think further that, Jason's saying, like, you could get a single plate clutch that may hold the power you need, but it goes back to the application. You may want to go to a 2 or 3 plate clutch for, heat capacity reasons, because as you add discs and floater plates, you add mass to the clutch for heat reasons, and then you're also adding more surface area, so your wear rate will be lower. So like Jason's mentioning, first question is what you're using it for.
Right. And for sure, if it's a, you know, say a endurance racing car, you know, for 24-hour road racing, you know, versus, you know, the same power level in something, you know, that's used more at the club level, you know, you could end up with two totally different clutches as well. So
Yeah, and that makes sense. Another one, and maybe Travis, this could be for you. Are the running costs, I'm sorry, this someone else just asked a question, so it moved up. Are the running costs for a typical race season less for the carbon clutch package? Is this something now we've got better components that we can run longer, and even though they may cost more up front, we're going to spread that cost out further?
Yeah, it's definitely a cost savings for the carbon. Once you get up and running with the package and you're able to shim it, and as long as the maintenance stays, it's definitely a cost savings, especially in our application with endurance racing. And you know, like I said, heat's a big thing for us with as many stops as we do. So it's been a cost savings for us.
yeah, like Kirk, if you hold up that clutch, so all right, so you're talking a 4-disc, 5.5-inch carbon clutch, total wear amongst all of the carbon plates. So you're talking 9 carbon plates in that clutch, 5 floaters and 4 driven discs was what, like
11,000
Yeah.
of wear total over a 24-hour race. I
per hour?
don't know if you can see that, but
Yeah.
no, probably not. But anyhow, this is every carbon clutch, we get a build sheet that shows the carbon plate thicknesses, and so that you could track wear. So after that race, we measured it and had 11,000 total wear. And then as the carbon clutch wears, as Travis was saying, you shim it. We have different, what we call a pressure plate, is a little ring that sits in there, and we have them in 10,000 increments. So as the carbon stack shrinks, you compensate for the wear by changing out that one little piece, and brings your clamp load back up to new, and you continue on.
Yeah, so to put
So we
that,
had taken that back and put it right back in the car and went the rest of the season on our side.
Well, we could have, but we wanted to use it we wanted to put it on display at PRI. This is the winning clutch for the 24-hour race, and then that didn't happen because of the show.
That's all right. We have it here on EPARTRADE, so that's awesome.
put it into perspective, that clutch is good for 200 thousandths of total wear over its life. So that one clutch at the rate they're going could run 9 or 10, you know, 24-hour races.
Wow, that's very impressive for sure.
Be more like 20. Sorry. Yeah, 200 divided by 10, right? So closer to 20.
Yeah, that's okay. Math wasn't my strong suit. That's why I talk, but I get it. So that's impressive though, for sure. This is sort of a follow-up. Says, would you still recommend performance upgrade of stock clutch for 300 horsepower endurance racing, 16-hour minimum up to 24 hours?
Yeah. So the other thing that we didn't really hit on with that is that when you go from, like, you know, the first guy was talking about street performance and, you know, drifting use. When you go into a road racing application, so not only are you looking at the, you know, durability of the clutch, you're looking at the performance of the clutch, right? So the lightweight, you know, how much you're going to save in terms of both weight and rotating inertia on the clutch and flywheel. And a small diameter clutch is also going to let you run a much lighter weight flywheel. So yeah, at 300 horsepower, if you're talking like an endurance road racing application, then you would definitely want to look at something better than a stock system, simply from the fact that you're talking a significant, you know, savings of driveline parasitic losses. You know, and it's also going to help the car on deceleration as well, because you don't have this big, heavy, you know, clutch and flywheel that you're trying to speed up or slow down. So yeah, things would definitely change. I would definitely, you know, recommend, if it was at the club level, I would look at our 7.25-inch clutch. You know, more when you got more, you know, into more of the professional levels, you'd be looking at 5.5 or smaller. But for a club level car, the 7.25 is a lot of bang for the buck. Still pretty good drivability for drivers who aren't really used to driving racing clutches. great reliability, endurance, but still compared to stock, it's a tremendous, performance increase.
Okay. Another question, how does the technical partnership work between the parts manufacturer, between Tilton and a race team, let's say Wayne Taylor Racing? What sort of responsibilities does each side take on? What does a manufacturer look for when it comes to picking a race team as a technical partner, and vice versa? So if Jason or Kirk or Travis, whoever wants to take that one on first. How about you, Travis, working with Tilton directly on your end?
So I think from our side, anything that we do is more of a partnership basis. So it's not good for either one of us if we both don't come out with a positive result. On our side, results and finishing races. On Tilton's side, it's improving the product and also getting everybody else to understand how good the product is. So I think the working together with everybody, like we mentioned, we've talked a lot about the metallic clutch. That's the ideal situation that you want working with the manufacturer, because we would do all these tests. We would instrument the car based on what Jason or Kirk would ask us to do. We would then give them the information as well as driver feedback, and then we would pull the clutches apart. We would do things internally, measure everything up, and then we'd sit down and talk. What do we need to make this better? Their ideas would come to us. We would, that sounds like it worked for us. We would schedule testing for things, so it didn't put us into a position that you don't want to lose a race by doing a test on something. So it's kind of a working relationship where we can use test days that don't affect our racing championship, but also give them some live experience on what the actual thing's going to do. It's just like anything with engineering. It all looks good on your computer. It all looks good on that piece of paper, but until you actually put it into a scenario where we can test it. So that's the biggest thing of manufacturers and race teams is we can develop the product before it goes into the consumer's hands.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
further to
Go ahead.
further Travis, in regards to the carbon clutches, like they helped us. We had evolution of carbon materials, and they were able to give us feedback on how engagement characteristics were with the drivers and the wear rates were. And so, we learned a lot, with the information they gave back, provided back to us. And then again, like them showing how successful they are with our product makes it easier for us to go to some of the other race teams and have a little, it's proven basically.
We can give you a clutch that you can show that won the 24-hour race.
Yeah.
Actually, we can give you 3 of them.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Although I get the sense that Travis might want that back at some point.
We sent him a new one.
The big thing for me is, is the data, right? And by data, I don't just mean the numbers, but I mean the feedback from the drivers. We have people, every year at the trade shows like, oh, I'd love to be your test, help you test products or this or that. And it's like, I appreciate that, but you need a certain level of professional team that has the technicians, the engineers, those good mechanics that will keep tabs on things, that will, like simply sending somebody a clutch and getting it back a year later with X amount of wear on it does us very little good. Whereas, when you give it to Travis and his guys, they'll tell you, okay, we had this many miles, this many pit stops, this many blah, blah, blah. And oh, by the way, the driver also kind of abused the clutch, leaving the pit box this one time. So if you see a little something extra there, it's just that level of feedback, right? Because, like Travis said, it can look great on the computer, and you can try to do it in, testing facilities and other things. You can build a test stand, you can put it on the dyno, you can do this and that. But the racing application in the car, those other things all require you to make certain assumptions that may or may not be accurate, whereas the racetrack is where the rubber meets the road, quite literally. So, getting that good, accurate feedback is invaluable to us, in terms of being able to say, well, okay, the clutch had this many starts and stops. It had this many races, therefore we can extrapolate that out to, this type of lifespan. And we can compare that to the same materials that that same team tested a year ago or 6 months ago, with a different, something different. So we can actually get an A to B test and see, if our changes made a significant difference or not. And that is huge.
I am curious, Jason, early in the conversation, you talked about, when you start to go with carbon or something like that, that can be cost prohibitive for a lot of racers out there, and it might not even make sense for their application. But what you learn in all that R&D with, say, Wayne Taylor Racing, how does that trickle down? Does it trickle down to a lot of the other product offerings that you have?
Oh, absolutely. When we're, like even what we were talking about with metallic materials, the metallic clutch of a few years back, the things that we learned working with Wayne Taylor, that we're going to try this, okay, and we're going to put it in the car and they're going to give us that good feedback and we're going to have our A to B comparison. It doesn't just stop with their clutch, right? That to take that and then not do anything else with it would be borderline criminal. So when you look back through what we've made to tweaks even in the NASCAR clutches, or in the club level clutches, or when we designed this new street performance clutch, all of that type of thing came in. The alloys that we developed for the clutch plates and the Wayne Taylor clutch are in our new street performance clutch. Like, you can't, there's no way of disconnecting that knowledge, that once it's better, you use the better stuff, right? So, I mean, that's absolutely something that we, that we do. So.
All right, we got one
to give
more.
you a little bit of detail on that. One of the things when we were testing this stuff, how detailed the team gets in our information back to them, is went as far as length of time that the clutch was being used, how long the driver had, was engaged or disengaged. But every single paddle on the clutch on the outside edge would have a different level of temperature paint on it. So when the car would come in between sessions, our guys would document which paint actually went off, so we knew how hot the clutch got at that particular time. And then once that paint went off, we would repaint it that same color and test something else. So we had ranges, and they went in 50-degree increments all the way around, and that was part of our process after every session. Here's what happened during this session, here's the temperature, and then we could correlate those temperatures with how long the driver was engaging the clutch. So our testing that we do for companies, we get very detailed on.
Wow, that's impressive. We do have one more quick one from the chat that I just wanted to get out there. It says, are there any health issues arising from carbon like the old days of asbestos brake pads?
Right. No, there really aren't. Carbon, the only thing that you would have to watch is like breathing heavy amounts of the dust, just simply as an irritant. It's carbon. It's what our bodies are made out of. It doesn't have any cancer causing properties to it. And with the manufacturing process of it, you basically are taking a specialized form of carbon fiber, stacking it up with a very special binder agent. It's then getting baked in an inert gas oven at over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's staying there for a period of weeks, to the point where the only thing left is carbon within a carbon matrix. So there's literally nothing but carbon in it. So, other than, like I said, you wouldn't want to sit there and suck on the, breathe it in while you're machining it. But beyond that, it really doesn't have any, any side effects, in terms of like cancer causing or anything nearly as bad as asbestos. That stuff's all, I mean, we honestly never used any asbestos in any of our products. But even then, our metallic products, we took all the lead and really harmful stuff out of those, probably 20 plus years ago. To where everything is, that's something that you don't have a choice anymore. You've got to really look at that stuff.
Well, Jason, Kirk, want to thank you, first of all, from Tilton. I know we talked a lot about clutches. We talked everything about clutches, but you guys offer so many more products like the in-cockpit controls and the braking systems and all of that. So we do appreciate that. And Travis, best of luck to you guys at Wayne Taylor Racing. You've got a great group of drivers there, big fans of all of them. So hopefully you can have a repeat at the Rolex 24 again, and then Kirk can have another clutch to show off, or 3.
Thank you.
Registering on EPARTRADE is easy. Fill out your name, email, phone number, and create a secure password. Next, select your business type. Choose supplier if you're looking to display products or services and connect with buyers. Choose racing business if you're looking to find new parts and connect with suppliers. Choose race team if you own or are a member of a professional racing team. Begin typing your company name. We most likely already have your company in our database, which you can select from the drop-down. Then, enter your job title. Choose Claim Company if you'll be editing your company profile. Other members of your company can choose Join Company if they'd like to use EPARTRADE as well. You can view and agree to our terms of use here. If you'd like to receive our weekly newsletter, choose Accept. Click Register Now, and your registration will be submitted for approval. You'll need to confirm your email once it goes through. To keep our platform industry only, you'll be approved shortly after. If we require additional proof of business, we'll reach out. Welcome to EPARTRADE.